Hey guys, it's Danny. Alrighty, today we're gonna have a discussion once again. Hopefully it's not gonna be a long video, and as the title suggests, it's about opposing ideas. Now, if you know me for a long time, you know that I'm kind of tolerant and try to find the reason with everything, but there are those things that I totally oppose. And I always try to give reasons for that. If the reasons are valid or not, I'm not sure. Of course, if I tell you the reasons, I think they're valid, but sometimes they might not be. I don't know. However, the idea is that I do oppose some stuff and I try to give arguments for what I oppose to. And I do this not because I want to be different or anything, it's just because I think information is more important than to be the crowd favorite. And if you watch my videos where I oppose certain stuff, you'll see the amount of dislikes. That's totally fine and it's totally normal. Whenever you oppose something, the fans of that something will pretty much dislike your opposition. That's totally fine. However, I don't do these stuff to be liked by everybody because one person cannot be liked by everybody. It's impossible. And also, one person cannot always be right. However, opposition is sometimes good. So provided you have arguments to sustain your opposition in your point of view, let's disregard those oppositions who are just there because somebody doesn't like a person or because somebody wants to be like the others and stuff like that. Those are not valid oppositions. I'll tell you about the valid oppositions and actually how they can create a chain reaction. So to better explain this, let me tell you a little bit of a story that will have to do with orchids. Trust me, but it has to do with aquatic plants and aquariums in general. So I'll try to make this brief. So for a long time before I started to grow orchids, I was into aquariums and more specifically into planted tanks. That's a different story. And I was the administrator of, right now, the biggest forum for aquarists in my country. And of course, along the years, because I was there for quite a few years, I saw all sorts of questions, all sorts of problems beginners had, and so on. So the most common problem an aquarium beginner has is getting the balance right, getting that cycle right. Most of the times we do make the mistake of adding too many fish into our aquarium. We don't let the aquarium cycle and so on. There is a chemical balance that needs to fix in order for things to work and not have problems. And I won't go too much into it, but it has to do with the nitrogen cycle. Now this will apply to orchids as well, don't worry. So in an aquarium, the nitrogen cycle needs to go through some steps to keep your aquarium safe from a poisonous state. Now because many people confront themselves with this, companies kind of took advantage a little bit of this situation. Therefore, you might know if you ever had an aquarium, you can always find those solutions that reduce ammonia, that reduce nitrates and nitrates and so on. So those products were created to help you kinda balance your aquarium. Well, that's a little bit relative. I'm sure there are those cases in which those products do help, but if you use them all the time, you will actually never obtain a true balance because you're maintaining it artificially. So one of the problems that we had back then were beginners who were actually using these products on a regular basis, and not because they misunderstood the intent of the product, but the companies themselves were actually encouraging people to keep using them all the time. So whenever you artificially maintain a balance, you're dealing with a ticking bomb because you're actually treating the symptoms, not the cause of your problems. So whenever you have a small debalance, your fragile balance will just go all over the place. Why I told you this story? Well, to emphasize the fact that whenever there seems to be a need in the market, companies will take over and try to fulfill the need. Now, the need might be real or might be due to lack of information. So on that forum, we usually promoted balance in a natural way and doing things properly rather than resorting to chemicals to keep an artificial balance. Okay, now let's talk about orchids. So whenever we try to recreate a balanced portion of nature in our environment, it's gonna be a little bit hard because nature always works on a large scale. You will always have microorganisms and chemical substances that you do not have in your home. With aquariums, it's very visible. You practically take 50 liters out of a lake and you place it in your home. Of course, things will not work as smooth. You kind of need to know a lot of stuff prior to you starting your aquarium hobby. But it's not impossible actually if you do have some information. With orchids, it's the same thing. We don't take the exact portion of nature and put it into our home. We only take the orchid and then we try to work around it somehow and try to recreate as much as possible what its natural conditions are. And of course, when we try to maintain an orchid alive, we always run into trouble because we don't necessarily get the balance right, and that's normal. However, when there is a need, a company might come and fulfill it. And I'll give you an orchid example right now. So a few days ago, I made that video about water culture and my problems with it and why I don't think it's a good idea and I actually oppose it. Now, one of my viewers suggested that there is a product specifically designed for maintaining roots alive in water and practically avoiding root rot. I will give it that I didn't really look into the product, but you have the links below. I just read the comment from my viewer. So maybe you can see where I'm trying to aim here. So there is a need on the market for a product that will prevent root rot. And of course, the company came up with such a product. And from what I understand, it takes care of certain microbes and stuff like that, and fungi and all sorts of other things that are known to be present whenever something rots. Please note the carefulness of my words here. So let's understand a little bit what rotting is. While an orchid is alive, it's not rotting. While an orchid has dead tissue, it will rot. And this is because dead tissue rots. Live tissue does not rot. It needs to die first. Now, of course, we don't need all the orchid to die in order for it to rot. We just need parts of its tissue to die in order for them to rot. And of course, this can lead to other problems. If you have a bacterial infection or a point of rotting, it can spread out and infect other tissues. But how it goes is, it infects the tissue, it kills the tissue, and then it starts to rot and decompose it. This is how microorganisms designed to decompose work. Whatever they find dead, they will decompose. So in essence, root rot can be caused by many things. And if root rot is, let's say, a symptom of some dying tissue caused by some, let's say, microbes, then yes, this product can keep us safe from that. However, if a dead tissue is dead for other reasons, let's just say suffocation, that product will be useless. And I'll give you an example. Have you ever been to a chemistry, actually not a chemistry, a biology lab? Did you ever see those specimens of small animals kept in formaldehyde? I think this is the term. Yeah, they're now rotting, they're preserved in that formaldehyde. However, it doesn't mean they're alive. They did die, yes, but that substance keeps them from decomposing. Again, does not mean they're alive. Pretty much how a product will work with our roots. If somehow the roots died from various reasons like suffocation or other diseases that don't necessarily have to do with microbes, then it's pretty much useless. You might say they will be kept attached, but not kept alive. Again, this is an example. I'm not sure if this is exactly how they advertise the product. It's just what I understand from the comment I received. But you can see how a company can take advantage of a certain need, which, to be honest, it's not a real need. You can absolutely avoid root rot if you're careful and you know a little bit about orchids, you have some information. But the company tries to fill that need. The company doesn't necessarily care if it's a real need or not. And I'm not referring to all companies, I'm just referring to certain companies. And it's a delicate subject. I know not all companies are bad, not all products that appear bad are actually bad if they're used how they're supposed to be used and so on. But you can see my concern. If we all start to embrace an idea without actually thinking a little bit about it, there will be companies who will take advantage of us and our lack of knowledge. And there are a lot of examples that I can actually give you, and the most, let's say, trendy one, except for water culture these days, is using, how do I call them, biofertilizers. Now, the use of biofertilizers is a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. It really depends how you apply it. Let's go back to the nitrogen cycle. So if you search a little bit about the nitrogen cycle, you will see it's a chemical process that naturally happens in nature, and practically it kind of sustains all of us alive, including plants. I'll give you a brief explanation. Nitrogen, as a molecule of nitrogen, cannot be picked up by orchids, cannot be used. It needs to be in a different chemical formula. Plants usually tend to go for nitrates. It's a chemical formula of the nitrogen that can be assimilated by plants. And in nature, there is a cycle from which nitrogen goes through various stages until it reaches a nitrate state. and then it can be picked up by orchids and utilized, and so on. Now, the problem with biofertilizers is that they don't really give you nitrates. They give you nitrogen in a specific type of form. It can be urea, ammonia, and so on. And then for a plant to pick it up, it needs to have it in the form of nitrates. Of course, there are some plants in this world which have some enzymes. Okay, I'm not going to go into details. They can transform nitrogen themselves in the root area, but I will not go into details because I don't want to say stupid stuff. The main idea is that most plants will pick up nitrogen much better than other types of chemical formulas in which nitrogen is present in nature. So nature works around this cycle when it comes to plants. So as I was saying, biological fertilizers, they really do need this process to happen. Problem is, the nitrifying bacteria need some conditions to actually live. And let's go back to the aquarium. An aquarium balance depends on the nitrogen cycle. If you don't have the cycle set up in your aquarium, you cannot keep your aquarium practically clean and nice and with live fish and plants. If you've been a long-time subscriber, you might know that about 2 years ago, I think, I said that I don't believe that in our pots, with our medias that we use with orchids, I don't believe the nitrifying bacteria have those conditions to actually thrive and process the nitrogen from an ammonia or urea state to a nitrate state. Although if you remember at the time, the American Orchid Society kind of contradicted me. They were actually saying that in bark media, because of decomposition processes, nitrogen is lost, which is totally not true actually. So at the time I kind of chose to oppose the American Orchid Society in this regard only, let's say. Was it good? Was it bad? Well, it turned out to be good, because recently in their articles they are sustaining the idea that nitrifying bacteria have a very hard time living in bark. They are more adapted to survive in soils that don't necessarily go bone dry all the time. So getting back to fertilizers, biofertilizers can work to some extent or cannot work actually the way you'd like them to work. And it's hard to see this with orchids because they do grow very, very slow. However, as a commercial side of things, companies that produce biological fertilizers will always try to give you the good stuff about their product. Will also try to attack the competition, saying that, you know what, chemical, they're not chemical, let's avoid this term, everything is a chemical. Synthetic fertilizers are actually toxic. Have you ever seen a toxicity warning on the back? You didn't. This means it's not toxic actually. One molecule of nitrogen is no different than another molecule of nitrogen, no matter the source, it's just a molecule. So companies which produce biofertilizers, they need to sell and survive as well. And their claims are more or less true or more or less valid. I don't think you'll ever hear them say, be warned, you need to have a nitrogen cycle in your pot. They will never say this because they will not sell their product anymore. So again, the choice is yours if you want to use them or not, but it's better to have the knowledge, because sometimes it might save you some money. If you grow your orchid in that type of environment in which nitrifying bacteria can actually survive and do their job, you'll probably be very okay with those fertilizers. However, the way I grow mine in my house, in bark chips and so on, yeah, those nitrifying bacteria are not there. And I do kind of have 7 years of experience with nitrifying bacteria from my aquarium, so I know them well, and I know they're finicky creatures. If you leave your aquarium with its filters shut for a day, maybe less than that, you'll probably have some awful surprises. These bacteria are not resilient. Anyway, getting back to our orchids. So the reason why I sometimes oppose stuff is not because I just want to be different. I want to get to the bottom of things. And being very honest and very sincere doesn't mean you're diplomatic. And yeah, sometimes I do lack diplomacy. However, diplomacy in my book is somewhere lower than sincereness and actual knowledge. It's just me. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just how I am. And of course, because I'm like that, I'm gonna share with you sincere and honest stuff. Even if they might be wrong. Sometimes I am wrong. Luckily, I was more right than wrong, but I'll give you an example of a wrong thing. A while back, Maria Young here on YouTube split an orchid in half. I'll add a link to her video somewhere here if you click it. At first, I didn't say it, but at first I was convinced it will not work. Of course, I didn't have any scientific evidence to sustain what I thought, because I don't think orchid dissections are very common, but in my mind, it didn't work. However, as it turns out though, the experiment worked and the orchid was propagated. It created new keikis, so I was wrong. Now, whether I will choose to split my orchids in half or not ever, it really does not matter. However, it offered information for those persons who were interested. And who knows, maybe one day I'll have a split into Phalaenopsis. I know now that I shouldn't throw it in the trash. But here's the difference. Maria actually made updates to her experiment. And actually the updates didn't take a long time to appear. Out there, however, you do have a lot of ideas exposed, but no updates, and some updates really do need years to give a final conclusion. So sometimes these updates are what I'm looking for. If I don't see them, if I don't see any conclusion, an end of a story, I cannot be convinced of something if I have totally opposite opinions of myself. And I think this is a good way of actually thinking about things rather than just plunge in headfirst with an idea on the principle that, hey, if it worked for somebody, it's gonna work for me as well. And that person is always right. No, nobody is always right. However, there are persons who are right most of the times, and this is because they do try to find the end of the story and a logical explanation for things. And I'm trying to be one of those persons who actually is not wrong most of the times. It does not mean that I will not be wrong, but here is a perspective about how I think about things. And I'm totally aware that if I oppose something that many people like due to my reasons, I'll probably not be liked by those persons. But the main idea and the goal of my videos and of my activity is not to be liked by everybody, because it's impossible. It's to share information, to share what I see and my experience and so on. The fact that I don't agree to something might not mean anything really, but I do try to give reasons for why I oppose something. And as I was saying, if you have the voice of opposition rather than a monopoly of agreement, let's call it like that, you'll always have entities that will try to take advantage of a certain situation. And if you don't oppose it somehow with some arguments, people will most probably plunge in and spend their money on something that can actually be avoided. I think that whatever you do in life, you should just try to make your own opinion about stuff and try to look for those updates, as I was saying, and try to find the reasoning behind it. If somebody says, I do this because I like how it looks like, it might not necessarily be the best idea. But if somebody says, I do this because this, and that, and the other thing, and here's some scientific support for it, then you have better chances to be right, in my opinion. So anyway, let's end the discussion. Thank you guys for watching. If you'd like to see more orchid videos from me and soon other new and interesting plants, simply subscribe to my channel. I post on a daily basis. Also, feel free to leave me comments, suggestions, whatever you like in the comment section below. I always check it. If you click on the left side of your screen, you'll be directed to orchidnature.com, where you'll find care sheets, identification sheets, and also you can talk to us in the forum section. And on the right side of your screen, you can click to watch another orchid video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye.